A big legal blow for former President Trump. The Justice Department told the IRS Friday that it must turn over Trump's tax returns to the House Ways and Means Committee, which has been trying to obtain them for more than 2 years. Joining me now to discuss is Tim O'Brien. He's senior columnist for Bloomberg Opinion, also author of Trump Nation. Tim, good to have you on.
Thanks, Jim.
The former president certainly not shy about going to court over things. IRS has given him 72 hours, which we believe extends to Wednesday. Does he have legal recourse here? Where would he challenge this and how?
Well, I would assume he would still. I can't imagine they won't challenge it because there's a lot of perilous aspects of the information in those tax returns, I think, getting out into the wild. So I'm assuming they're looking at this. I'm assuming that they would still challenge it on the grounds originally that the DOJ, Bill Barr's DOJ, blocked the release, which was that Congress was just engaged in a fishing expedition. It wasn't pursuant to any of the Congress's oversight authority or legislation, and therefore it should be stopped. I imagine now they'll try to challenge that in court, but they're going to have an uphill battle with that.
So if it comes to Congress, if these tax returns come to Congress, are they now effectively public? Will you and I and people watching here be able to see them?
I suspect we will at some point. I think Congress is going to have to be judicious and I think circumspect about how they post these. There's a lot of, I think, issues around separation of powers and checks and balances that rides as much on trust as it does on the rule of law. But if they hold a hearing on oversight of the executive branch and on potential financial conflicts of interest that are raised in Donald Trump's tax returns or possible corruption, then I think they get posted as exhibits to those hearings. And they may come out even before then, I think, through leaks, but we'll see.
So the president has multiple legal tracks, perilous ones, underway right now. I mean, you have an investigation, one in the state of Georgia into his efforts to overturn the election. You have the Manhattan DA's continued case and indictment, in fact, of Trump Organization. Now you have this, at least exposing it. We don't know if there's criminal behavior in here, but at least exposing what the president has tried to conceal for some time. What's the political effect of that for a person who remains the choice of most, at least, Republicans as their nominee in 2024?
Well, I think the Manhattan DA's investigation still is the most perilous for him because that is a criminal investigation. There's a possibility that there'd be an orange jumpsuit waiting for Donald Trump at the end of that process. I don't anticipate it yet getting there. There's a lot of evidence that needs to come into the public record before that occurs. I don't know that any of his core supporters would care about any of this. I think the real issue is what do traditional conservative Republicans and moderate voters think about it in a general election. That's where the real meat of the issue is. And I think if more of this comes into the open and we get a much deeper handle on what the real texture of Trump's conflicts of interest look like, it will matter. Because I think one of the great unanswered questions of Trump's administration was, why did he engage in these dances with dictators? And to what extent was he feathering his nest financially in his pursuit of different public policy positions? And that still hasn't been satisfactorily answered. And I think that's one of the reasons he's fought so hard to keep his tax returns hidden.
That's the question, right? Not just tax avoidance or evasion, but possible conflicts of interest here. The president's raising money off of all this. He's raising money off the big lie. He's raising money off his claim that these are political witch hunts. What does he do with all that money?
Well, he's clearly not spending it for the reasons that he said he was raising it. You know, his initial, the cash register drawer opened right after the election when he said he was raising money for a legal defense fund, and he never spent very much of it on lawyers. And I think a light went off in his head and in his children's head that they realized that campaign fundraising is a pretty good business when you're Donald Trump, and if you aren't really concerned about whether or not the people giving you the money feel like you're grifting off of them. But he has a huge war chest right now, and it I think is a indicator of the kind of hold he still has on a significant faction in the Republican Party, and it means he's someone who has to be contended with.